Marissa Alden stood alone under the oppressive Savannah sun, her hands trembling as she gripped the small wooden box that held her 8-year-old son, Liam. The dry heat pressed against her skin like a heavy blanket, and the smell of fresh dirt mingled with the faint scent of magnolia trees. She had expected family support, or at the very least someone to stand with her in this unbearable moment, but the cemetery was empty except for her. She forced herself to breathe, convincing herself they might be running late. The sound of dirt hitting the coffin echoed in her ears as she lowered it into the grave, each thud like a hammer against her chest. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She fumbled with it, hoping for a comforting message, only to find a notification from her mother, a listing on a luxury real estate site for a sprawling $1.5 million estate by the coast, captioned, "Fresh Start." Marissa froze. That amount matched exactly the total of Liam's life insurance and the trust she had set up for him. Her heart sank. She realized, with a cold clarity, that her family's priorities were not in mourning Liam's death, but in fantasizing about the money he had left behind. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, feeling an icy surge of anger and disbelief. As she drove back to her small apartment, Marissa replayed the moment over and over, her knuckles white around the steering wheel. The streets were unusually quiet, as if the city itself were giving her space to grieve, yet inside her, turmoil churned like a storm. The scent of lilies and roses from the funeral lingered in her car, heavy and suffocating. When she finally stepped into her apartment, the silence was nearly unbearable, pressing against her like a physical weight. She wanted to scream, to crumble to the floor, but instead a sharp focus settled over her mind. She realized that this grief, raw and endless as it felt, had sharpened her, made her see clearly. She had been used, ignored, and manipulated for decades, and the death of her son revealed just how deep the family's indifference ran. Marissa sank onto the couch, staring at the muted light streaming through her blinds. She whispered aloud, as if telling herself a secret, "They think grief will make me weak. They're wrong." That evening, she accessed her mother's online accounts, something she had never dared do before. Using credentials she had long suspected her mother would never protect, she logged into the family's flower delivery service and found that arrangements for Liam's funeral had been ordered 2 weeks earlier, proof that her absence was intentional. Her hands shook as she continued investigating, checking shared financial accounts and seeing purchases her sister, Cara, had made during the same week. Expensive jewelry, lavish dinners, and even a weekend getaway, all while Liam lay in the ground. The evidence was irrefutable. With deliberate calm, she revoked Cara's credit card access and changed the locks on the family's vacation cabin, which she legally owned but they treated as their own playground. Each click of the mouse felt like a small act of liberation, a reclaiming of power stolen from her for decades. For the first time in a long time, Marissa felt not just grief but clarity, a resolve forming like steel in her chest. The next morning, she methodically severed digital and financial ties. Cards were canceled, smart home locks were changed, and shared streaming and cloud accounts were deleted. Each action, though small, became a symbolic act of resistance, a declaration that she would no longer allow her family to control or exploit her. As she worked, her mind drifted to a conversation from months ago, when her mother had sneered at her career as a botanical illustrator. "You waste your talent on flowers, Marissa. You'll never make anything of yourself." The words stung then, but now they fueled her. She realized that the manipulation, the subtle insults, the years of being guilted and dismissed, all of it had been training for a moment like this. Where once she would have crumbled under the weight of shame, she now harnessed it. The apartment, once a quiet space of mourning, began to feel like a command center. Each lock changed and account deleted, a small victory in a silent war she had decided to fight. In the following days, Marissa pored over old bank statements, constructing what she called the ledger. Every transaction revealed decades of financial support she had provided to her parents and Cara, often met with indifference or manipulation. Her father's guilt trips, her mother's intermittent warmth, and Kara's bratty demands had been orchestrated with a precision Marissa only now fully comprehended. The family had relied on intermittent reinforcement, offering just enough affection or approval to keep her attached, addicted even, to the hope of love. She recorded each entry meticulously, noting amounts, dates, and patterns of behavior. 2 days after Liam's funeral, a package arrived from her mother. Inside were overdue bills for the family's beach house, threatened with foreclosure, along with a note. "Do the right thing, Marissa. Family helps family." Rage boiled in her chest. They hadn't mourned. They hadn't cared. They had seen her grief as a tool to access money. And in that moment, the shame she had carried for decades melted into something powerful, fuel for resistance, a determination to reclaim her life and force them to face the consequences of their greed. Marissa didn't have to wait long. 2 days after the package arrived, her apartment door rattled violently. She opened it to find her parents, Gerald and Vivian Alden, standing there with thin smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They carried themselves as though the apartment, the neighborhood, and even Marissa's life belonged to them. "Marissa," Vivian said sweetly, but with a sharp edge, "we're here to help. You've been so overwhelmed." Gerald stepped forward, his voice low but insistent. "It's for your own good. We're worried about you." Marissa's lips pressed into a tight line. "Overwhelmed? You mean by losing Liam?" she asked, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "He's gone, and you're talking about me being unstable?" Vivian's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand the way we're trying to protect you." Marissa let out a bitter laugh, the sound echoing through the small apartment. "Protect me? Protect yourself, maybe. I saw the Zillow listing. I saw the bills. You've spent the week shopping and planning, not grieving." The words landed like stones, and for a fleeting moment, she saw the flicker of guilt, or maybe calculation, pass across their faces. Vivian, as though reading Marissa's mind, reached into her bag and pulled out a set of papers. "We've prepared voluntary conservatorship forms," she said smoothly. "We want to manage your finances and Liam's trust. For your protection." Gerald leaned closer, a shadow behind his polished demeanor. "Sign them, Marissa. It's the only way we can ensure nothing happens to you or the money." Marissa's hands shook, but her mind was sharper than ever. She picked up her phone, scrolling through messages, calendar entries, and security footage, evidence of their manipulation, their lies, their coordination. "You won't get what you want," she said firmly. "I have proof of every lie you've told, every false claim, every transaction you tried to hide. You think I'm alone, but I'm not. Eric and Kelly have reviewed everything. And guess what? You've committed fraud, forgery, and perjury." Gerald's face twisted with anger, but Vivian's mask cracked first. "You can't," she began, and Marissa interrupted, cold and precise. "Oh, but I can. And I will." Outside, Kara waited in her car, phone perched on a tripod, live-streaming the confrontation. She was narrating to the world about Marissa's erratic behavior, hoping sympathy and social proof would pressure her into signing the forms. Marissa, though aware of the stream, didn't panic. Instead, she smiled faintly, a plan forming. She called Eric and explained the situation, asking him to alert authorities if anything escalated. Then she texted the IRS anonymously about the family's large, suspicious transactions. As Gerald and Vivian pressed, framing themselves as the saviors, Marissa calmly retrieved the ledger and the security footage. "You wanted to manipulate everyone into thinking I'm unstable," she said. "Here's the reality. Every threat, every lie, every financial scam is on record." Their confidence faltered, Kara's narration faltered, and the world outside saw not a grieving mother, but a woman exposing corruption and deceit in real time. The following days were a careful dance of strategy and patience. Marissa played along superficially, transferring $450,000 to satisfy her family's immediate demands, but the money was frozen by federal authorities, thanks to the whistleblower report she filed. Gerald and Vivian were trapped between the IRS investigation and the criminal loan sharks who had been pressuring them for years, pressure Marissa had learned about through her lawyer. Kara tried to spin the narrative online, posting stories of fear and instability, but each post was countered by evidence Marissa shared quietly with her attorney, creating a wall of undeniable proof. She even arranged a small meeting with a retired judge, Kelly, who had been a friend of her late husband. Together, they outlined how her family's desperation had driven them to fabricate a narrative of mental instability in order to seize Liam's trust. Marissa finally realized that her family had been addicted not to wealth alone, but to control over her emotions, her grief, and her lifetime of sacrifice. Once the freeze was in place, Marissa began systematically dismantling their power. She revoked any remaining shared access to her properties and accounts, changed the locks, and froze their vacation cabin privileges permanently. She refused to engage with their manipulative tactics in person, communicating only through her lawyers. Gerald tried to intimidate her with threats of involuntary psychiatric holds, citing falsified emails, but Marissa remained composed, presenting digital proof and security footage that contradicted every claim. Vivian's face, once smooth and calculating, now showed real fear. Kara, trapped in her car, broadcasted into an empty digital echo chamber. Marissa felt a surge of vindication, not from revenge, but from finally taking control of the chaos her family had caused. Every calculated move reinforced her autonomy, proving that grief had not broken her, it had refined her. As the legal net tightened around the Aldens, Marissa reflected on her decades of sacrifice. She had provided financial support for her parents' home, bills, and vacations. Kara's college tuition and lavish lifestyle had been funded largely by her. Her grief, once a private prison, had now revealed a network of exploitation she had long suspected but never confirmed. In a quiet evening of reflection, she opened the ledger again and traced every act of control, manipulation, and greed. It was painful, yes, but also clarifying. She whispered to herself, "I did everything for them. And now, I do something for me and Liam." This resolve guided the final stages of her plan: reclaim her life entirely and honor her son in a way her family could never manipulate. With the Aldens exposed, Marissa worked with her attorney and the retired judge to prepare formal filings that detailed the family's debt crisis tied to an illegal Atlanta gambling ring. Kara's involvement, along with Gerald and Vivian's co-signing, explained the urgency behind their predatory actions. Each court filing, each documented email, and every video recording became ammunition in the legal battle to protect her remaining assets and Liam's trust. The once overbearing threat of conservatorship dissolved as the court recognized the overwhelming evidence of the family's criminal and manipulative behavior. Marissa could finally breathe, knowing the legal system would now back her integrity rather than her family's lies. The whistleblower reward arrived weeks later, enough to rebuild a life from scratch. Marissa used the funds to establish the Liam Alden Astronomy Scholarship, a tribute to the curiosity and joy her son had embodied. The scholarship, open to children passionate about science and discovery, became a public, enduring legacy. The Aldens lost their house to the IRS, and Kara fled the state, leaving a trail of digital evidence that would haunt her future attempts at manipulation. Marissa finally experienced quiet nights in her apartment, no longer suffocated by grief or betrayal, but filled with purpose and clarity. Marissa reflected on the journey, the harrowing path from the cemetery to the courthouse, the confrontation with lies and manipulation, and the painstaking reclaiming of autonomy. She realized she had not lost her family. She had stopped carrying them. Grief, which once had been a tool to keep her subdued, had become a catalyst for empowerment. The apartment she had once called a war room now felt like a sanctuary, a space where she could plan for the future and honor Liam's memory with every action. Her resilience was not forged in isolation alone, but through the recognition that she deserved truth, justice, and freedom. On the first anniversary of Liam's death, Marissa stood beneath a clear night sky, telescope set up in her backyard, and thought of her son as she prepared the first award for the scholarship in his name. She whispered to the stars, "This is for you, Liam. I'll keep building, keep creating, keep fighting." She smiled, a mix of sorrow and fierce pride, knowing that the Aldens' hold over her life had ended. Their greed, manipulation, and deceit had failed, not because of luck, but because Marissa finally claimed her power. The night was quiet, but inside, a fire burned bright. Grief transformed into strength, loss into legacy, and betrayal into freedom. Marissa had emerged, not just surviving, but thriving, finally able to live for herself and the son she loved, honoring his memory with every step forward. Months passed, and Marissa's life settled into a rhythm she hadn't known in years. The apartment no longer felt like a war room but a space of quiet control, filled with books, sketches of botanical illustrations she had long neglected, and small reminders of Liam, his favorite telescope, a little model rocket he had once begged her to build, and photos of his wide, curious eyes. The scholarship she had established brought her letters from children she would never meet, each filled with hope and dreams ignited by her son's memory. Occasionally, her phone buzzed with messages from former friends and distant relatives, people who had once assumed her grief would isolate her. They were surprised, even cautious, in their newfound respect. "Marissa, I can't imagine what you went through," one text read, "but you're incredible." She smiled, letting herself feel pride, remembering the rage and heartbreak that had propelled her actions, transforming them into something meaningful. She realized for the first time that her life could exist without the Alden shadow, that she didn't need validation from the people who had caused so much harm. The freedom was exhilarating, and yet, she remained vigilant, knowing how cunning her family had been. Every decision she made now was measured, deliberate, and in alignment with her values, a sharp contrast to the years of manipulation she had endured. One afternoon, Marissa received a formal court notice. The Aldens were contesting the IRS freeze and the scholarship funds, attempting to claim mismanagement. She read it calmly, with no panic, and called Eric. "We're prepared," she said. "They're grasping at straws. Everything we've documented is airtight." Eric's voice over the phone was reassuring. "Exactly. They have no case. The documentation alone will expose them again, and this time the consequences will be severe." Marissa hung up and leaned back, closing her eyes. She could hear Liam's voice in her mind, urging her to stay steady, to not let anger cloud her judgment. She imagined him peering through the telescope, fascinated by distant galaxies, unconcerned with petty human deceit. She whispered softly, "This is for you, Liam. We'll handle it together." That night, she stayed up late in her office, reviewing every legal document, every ledger entry, every recorded video, ensuring no loophole remained. The process, though tedious, reinforced her control. She was no longer reacting to her family's schemes. She was anticipating them, strategically neutralizing threats before they could even reach her. The Aldens' desperation grew with each failed attempt. Kara tried to re-enter Marissa's life through social media, posting tearful videos claiming she had been forced to leave by her mother and father's scheming. Gerald and Vivian, meanwhile, attempted to contact Marissa directly, sending polite but insistent letters about family unity and forgiveness. Marissa read each carefully, noting the lies, the manipulations, and the twisted justifications. She responded only through her attorney, maintaining a record of every correspondence. One evening, she sat at her kitchen table, reviewing the ledger once more. "They thought grief would break me," she murmured, "but it built me instead." In that moment, she realized her life had transformed completely. She no longer measured herself by the approval of those who had exploited her. She measured herself by her integrity, her creativity, and her ability to protect what truly mattered, her son's legacy and her own autonomy. The apartment, once heavy with mourning, now felt alive with purpose, each corner echoing with determination rather than loss. Finally, the court ruled in Marissa's favor. The IRS freeze remained, the scholarship funds were protected, and the Aldens were formally barred from any access to Liam's trust or her personal finances. She attended the hearing with Eric, feeling a quiet triumph. Vivian's face was pale, Gerald's jaw tight, and Kara, watching from the back, slumped in defeat. Marissa spoke briefly when asked, her voice steady. I am grateful for the legal system, for the evidence that shows the truth. Liam's memory deserves protection, and so do I. The judge nodded, granting the protection and reinforcing the family's permanent exclusion. Outside the courthouse, Marissa breathed deeply, the sunlight warm against her skin. She felt a lightness she hadn't known in decades. Her family's power had been stripped, their manipulations exposed, and her life and Liam's legacy was finally hers alone. As evening fell, Marissa returned home and looked out over the city from her apartment window. The sky was painted in purples and oranges, and she imagined Liam gazing at the same stars she had always tried to teach him to notice. She thought of the scholarship, of the children it would help, and of the resilience that had grown from unimaginable grief. "We did it, Liam," she whispered, voice full of both sorrow and pride. For the first time in years, she felt the future was hers to shape, free of manipulation, free of deceit, and full of possibility. She understood now that grief, love, and resilience could coexist, not as burdens, but as fuel for life. That night, Marissa sat with her telescope and her drawings, the weight of loss softened by purpose, the fire of survival blazing within her, and the knowledge that she had truly reclaimed her life. In the weeks that followed, Marissa turned her focus fully toward rebuilding her life. She reopened her small botanical illustration studio, dusting off supplies that had lain untouched since before Liam's death. The smell of paint and soil filled her apartment, grounding her in the present, and she found herself sketching flowers with a renewed intensity, each stroke a quiet declaration of independence. She even began teaching virtual classes for children, sharing her knowledge of plants and ecology, while integrating subtle lessons about resilience and self-confidence. One afternoon, a young student asked, "Miss Marissa, did you always know you could do this?" She paused, smiling gently. "No," she said, "sometimes you have to discover your strength in the hardest moments." The words hung in the air, and she felt them resonate as much for herself as for the children. The Aldens, once looming over every choice, were now a distant echo. She could finally breathe and create freely without fear of interference or judgment. Evenings became her sanctuary. She spent long hours at the telescope, mapping constellations, imagining Liam's laughter as he had once begged to see the planets. The scholarship began to attract applications from talented and curious children, many of whom had never had the resources to explore science fully. Marissa reviewed each carefully, writing encouraging letters and notes, ensuring Liam's legacy would inspire others to chase their dreams. Occasionally, she received indirect messages from Kara, claiming she wanted reconciliation. Marissa read them once calmly, then deleted them. She whispered to herself, "No, I choose my peace, not their chaos." Her life was finally her own, defined by choices and actions rooted in her values rather than the manipulations of her parents or sister. The grief that had once felt all-consuming had been transformed into a source of motivation and clarity, giving her the courage to create something lasting and beautiful in memory of her son. One crisp morning, Marissa received an unexpected invitation. A local botanical garden wanted her to exhibit her work in a solo show. She hesitated, remembering the years her mother and father had belittled her talents, dismissing her career as frivolous. But this time, she felt no hesitation, only resolve. "I'm not doing this for them," she murmured. "I'm doing it for me and for Liam." She poured her energy into the exhibit, combining vivid floral illustrations with personal notes about resilience, grief, and transformation. On opening night, the gallery buzzed with admiration. Visitors commented not only on her artistry but on the emotional depth behind each piece. Marissa smiled quietly, knowing that her past, painful and manipulative as it had been, had fueled the authenticity of her work. For the first time, she truly felt seen for who she was, rather than what she had given to others at their expense. As the sun set that evening, Marissa stood outside the gallery, feeling the warm glow of accomplishment. The city skyline stretched before her, and she imagined Liam's small hand reaching for hers, guiding her through the stars and flowers she now embraced fully. The Aldens were gone from her life, their control shattered, and she had not only survived, but flourished. She whispered to the night sky, "We did it, Liam. We built something real, something that lasts." In that moment, grief and love intertwined, not as chains but as wings, lifting her toward a future filled with purpose, creativity, and peace. Marissa finally understood that she had not only reclaimed her life, but had transformed her sorrow into a legacy, ensuring that Liam's light, and her own, would shine brightly for years to come. As winter approached, Marissa decided to take a quiet trip to the coast, a place Liam had loved visiting, where the sand met the water in endless waves. She walked along the shoreline, carrying a small sketchbook and her telescope. The wind tugged gently at her hair as she paused to observe the horizon, thinking of how different life had once felt. Memories of Liam laughing as he built sandcastles came unbidden, bittersweet and sharp. She whispered aloud, "I wish you could see this, Liam, but I'll carry it for both of us." Sitting on a dune, she opened her sketchbook and began drawing, letting her hands trace the outlines of shells and driftwood, each stroke infused with grief, memory, and newfound strength. The sea's rhythm matched her heartbeat, steadying her thoughts and reminding her that life, like the tide, moves forward. For the first time, she felt a sense of complete agency over her own life, not just her financial independence or legal victories, but her inner world, her creativity, and her connection to the sun she had loved so fiercely. While walking back toward her rental cottage, Marissa noticed a local bookstore displaying her illustrations in a small window exhibit. Children pressed their faces against the glass, pointing excitedly at the vibrant flowers, the carefully rendered details, and the handwritten notes about each plant. A young girl turned to her mother and asked if she could attend one of Marissa's classes, and the mother nodded eagerly. Marissa smiled softly, remembering how often she had been told she would never make a meaningful impact. "They don't see me," she murmured, thinking of her parents' past dismissals. Yet here she was, reaching lives she had never imagined touching, her grief transformed into purpose. She realized that healing did not mean forgetting Liam. It meant creating something lasting, a tangible imprint of love and resilience. Every sketch, every scholarship application, every child she inspired became a thread in a tapestry connecting memory, action, and hope. The Aldens no longer existed in her decisions or in the world she was building. They were a cautionary echo of the past she had overcome. That evening, Marissa returned home, her heart both heavy and light. She set up the telescope on her balcony, scanning the stars for constellations Liam had once loved. As the night deepened, she imagined him peering back at her, his curiosity alive in every shimmering point of light. A soft knock interrupted her reverie. An old friend from her botanical classes, David, had stopped by with a small gift, a notebook with blank pages for new sketches. "For your next project," he said gently, "and for everything you've been through." Marissa accepted it with a quiet nod, her gratitude more than just polite. It was a recognition that she was no longer alone in creating something meaningful. She shared stories of Liam, of her battles with her family, and of the scholarship she had started, and David listened without judgment, simply offering presence and encouragement. That night, her apartment felt alive, filled with both memory and potential, a sanctuary she had fought to claim and maintain. In the final months of that year, Marissa fully embraced her independence and purpose. She continued teaching, painting, and overseeing the scholarship, each task a deliberate act of honoring Liam and reclaiming her life. She never heard from Gerald, Vivian, or Cara again, and she felt neither longing nor guilt, only relief and clarity. Her grief had transformed into strength, her love for Liam had become legacy, and her life, once dominated by manipulation and betrayal, was now guided by choice, integrity, and passion. One crisp evening, Marissa sat with her telescope, sketchbook, and a warm cup of tea, gazing at the stars. "We did it," she whispered to Liam's memory. And for the first time in years, she felt truly at peace, knowing she had turned tragedy into triumph and loss into a life fully, authentically her own.